Good evening, everyone, and a very warm welcome to all of you. This is our 19th Learning Weekend webinar series, and we are back again with our, motive to continuous learning and knowledge sharing. I am Jyoti Sharma, your host for the day, and our thought leader for today is Mr. Bimal Rath, who will be sharing his insights and empowering us on knowledge on the topic nudging people towards continuous learning. Before we start with our Power Packs session, a little bit about the Core HRIR group. I feel extremely proud talking about this group and the initiatives that have been taken from the very inception. We are a group of 1,000 plus HR leaders, CHROs, and professionals across the world from Fortune 500 companies. And we work together for fostering and nurturing learning and growth for each and every one of us. We share insights, work together in terms of our personal as well as professional growth. All the HR professionals are based out of various locations globally and are interconnected through the basic string of knowledge that we work on. Since the very beginning, we've come up with various initiatives that play a catalyst role in grooming leaders for tomorrow through our enriched learnings from the experts today. Few of the initiatives that we would like to talk about is first is the WhatsApp interactive platform that we have, wherein all the HR professional network, collaborate, and share their expertise with each other. The next initiative for the group is the Learning Weekend webinar series that's there, and we are proud to say that this is our 19th Learning Weekend webinar series, wherein we invite thought leaders to share their insights and knowledge with all of us. Talking about our next initiative is the Chai Buddy series, wherein all the HR professionals meet face to face, discuss new ideas, initiatives, various industry practices, and the latest trends across the industry. One of our other initiatives is the job-based job board, which is essentially to provide all HR professionals with career opportunities in HR globally. Our next initiative is the Shining HR Award, which is there to felicitate the outstanding and deserving HR professionals. One of the newly launched initiative of the group is the Core Connect, wherein we post a question within the group on every third day on a particular topic, and we invite insights and views from all the HR professionals on that particular topic, and the best insights are published across. This is specifically for the learning and understanding of all the professionals, because we pick topics which are the most trending ones. We One of the next big event which is planned for 19th of October at MET Noida, which would constitute the HRCI scholarship test and the workshop panel discussion, and there's a lot more in store. So I would request all of you to keep watching the space for more. Moving to our much awaited session for the day. I feel extremely proud and privileged to announce our thought leader for today. He is Mr. Bimal Rath. He is the founder and managing director of Think Talent Services, which is a boutique firm specializing in leadership development, talent management, and culture change. He is also the chairman of Brahman Solutions, which specializes in e-learning and language localization solutions. With overall 25 years of experience in organizations like Nokia, British Telecom, ICER, and Tata Sons, he has gained extensive expertise and experience in Asian markets in leadership development and is an executive coach to the CXOs. On personal front, he has varied interest in travel and history, and that definitely adds a fuel to his zeal to learn and grow. He came out of his successful corporate avatar, which was for over 23 years, to become an entrepreneur, as he wanted to reinvent his learning in a different environment. Coming also, and one more thing, it also happens to be his birthday today, so we are thankful to him to be with us on this special day. So talking about a little bit more about myself, I have 14 plus years of HR experience. I'm currently working with British High Commission and have previously worked with organizations like British Council, Aon Hewitt, and IBM. Moving to our topic for the day, which is nudging people towards continuous growth and learning. Um, we are HR professionals and we have been working in various leadership roles, and we definitely work, with a lot of business leaders in different environments. Like Bimal most usually says, the leadership, talent, and culture are interlinked, and he has a lot of insight and experience in the leadership development space and coaching areas. So, Vimal, over to you. We would request you to please share your insights on the topic.
Great. Thanks, Jyoti. Am I clearly audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay. So thank you, Jyoti, for those kind words and the introduction, both to the topic as well as to myself. I speak very fast, so I will try and keep this as slow as I can, so that everybody has an opportunity to hear and then ask clarificatory questions if they want to. Uh, I think before I begin, just a couple of housekeeping sort of issues. So the way at least in my mind, I have planned the hour. After Jyoti's introduction, is that I will run through sort of a set of slides. I presume that these slides will also be later available to you as well. So some of the slides I will possibly run through fairly quickly because they are more background slides than anything else. Okay, and then there are some slides I'll spend a little more time on. I will try and make this really interactive towards the later part of the hour. So my initial presentation is possibly going to be about 20-25 minutes max. In between, I will also try and stop and see if there are any quick questions we can answer. I did get some questions from the group even before we started this evening today, and some of them I have tried to weave into my presentation, but not necessarily all of them. So we will have enough time to answer those questions later as well, hopefully. And I think the offer also is that later on, if you want to sort of connect and ask anything specifically, I think LinkedIn is the best way to connect with me. If you ask me something on LinkedIn, I'm more likely to sort of reply back fairly quickly, kind of thing. I think the last bit, I just wanted to make sure that I thank you for sparing your Saturday evening today, because I know Saturday evening is family time for many of us, and it's extremely important occasion in that sense, and particularly with Diwali and all that coming in. So I think I'm really grateful that all of you have made the time to come in and share the learning and participation. I would also invite comments and views, because while I am sharing a particular perspective and some degree of expertise coming in with some experience, I am sure all the people on the call may have had different experiences or may have a different perspective. So apart from questions, it would be very useful if any of you want to share other perspectives or comments, because that will be useful for the group as well at a larger level. Okay. So before I so Jyoti, we can get on to slide one, the cover slide.
Sure, Vimal.
Okay, so while the slide comes on, let me start off with a little bit of a deeper introduction to the topic, beyond what Jyoti sort of gave. So I think there are three elements to keep in mind on this topic. Okay, so one is that the concept of nudge is a fairly universal concept. So it is not that nudge is applicable only to learning. Okay, it is always applicable to other fields. And in fact, the origin of nudge, I think in 2007-8, most of the initial application was around customers and buyers and people who would actually spend money on buying products or services. So that was the space where people started experimenting with nudge, so to say. Okay. Um, I think the second thing I wanted to sort of just make sure people understand some of the conceptual stuff around nudge while we will go through, but in reality, it is not that it is a new concept. This is while the name has come in now, but the practice has been there possibly for ages. Perhaps not as structured as now we are looking at it to come into the field of HR apart from other fields. But certainly the concept is not a new concept, except that it's now been given a name, a more formal name, and possibly a little more formal research and so on and so forth. So you may be able to find examples going way back, including in our daily lives beyond HR, so to say. And I think the third thing I wanted to sort of just mention, from a topic point of view, is that while we have taken this as part of a learning journey, but learning by itself is a very very broad topic. So what I'm going to cover, given that we only have an hour, is some practical examples. But for the group, I think it would be very useful to keep in mind that this may well be applicable to other areas of learning as well. Okay, so just keep that at the back of the mind, and as we go into the topic, feel free to provide comments, views, and so on and so forth. Okay, Jyoti, can we move to the next slide? Yeah. Okay. So I think this you have already seen and you're fairly familiar that what are we really trying to achieve in this 1 hour. But I think the context in which this is becoming increasingly more important, the way at least I like to see, is that if HR people have a role of helping other people learn in organizations and become successful, then they have to be at the forefront of learning. Okay. And why I'm saying that is that if we don't role model ourselves as HR people as far as learning is concerned, are expecting that other employees or other managers or other leaders will actually do that is going to be a difficult task. And not only that, as a challenge, any line manager or an employee or leader can come back to you and say, so what is HR doing about its own learning? Okay, and very often this is a practical side of things you would find in organizations, that people will have, let's say, relatively not so nice comments about HR because HR is not seen necessarily as a role model. So one of the things, beyond what you see on the slide, I want to, make sure that you take back, is that for HR itself to learn is a critical element, and therefore possibly HR needs to nudge itself as much as it does, other people in the organization. Yeah. Uh, I think, as I mentioned earlier, the concept is applicable both to what I am going to cover in terms of a particular set of things around learning, but is also applicable to broader learning, which means, including school children, including young adults, including colleges, and so on and so forth, but also in organizations, not just formal learning, but also informal sort of a learning. Okay. Yeah, Jyoti, let's move ahead. Okay. So I think just think about this example of if you are going through the same path every day, what would be the positives and what would be the not so positives? Okay, so clearly, if you walk along the same park and the same path in that park, the advantages is that you get very familiar with that particular path and that particular park and so on and so forth, and possibly the trees and the flowers and everything else around on that path. However, if you have to then actually do walking on running on a completely different path, how comfortable or uncomfortable would that feel for you? And obviously it will be different for different people. There's no one black and white answer. Some people, for example, you would certainly have experience of, who are runners or walkers on a daily basis. They choose to actually go on a different path and be a lot more exploratory, whereas some people choose to be on exactly the same path every day because it gives them a sense of knowing the path and security and comfort and so on and so forth. Okay. Now you will have to examine for yourself, in the context of the new world, whether this is going to give you enough excitement, enough learning, enough exploration, and opportunities to innovate. We will come back to that in a minute, but I just want to point out one other thing, on this particular slide. For those of you who are sportsmen and those of you who are maybe runners particularly, or cricketers or tennis players and all that, uh, you would possibly look at, let's take something like cricket. Okay, so if you take a batsman, the really successful batsmen are only those who are able to play on a variety of pitches. They are able to play in very seaming pitches, in the dead pitches, on pitches which are spinning, and so on and so forth. And similar thing goes for other runners and for tennis players and so on and so forth. So that their ability to actually flex themselves, and I'm using the word flex very deliberately, with the same capabilities they have learned to sort of flex themselves into any context. So, or at least several contexts, if not all contexts. Okay. And therefore, I think as we look at learning and as we look at variety and the choices we make about our own comfort levels with exploring different varieties, I think the thing to really look at is that, do we have enough flex? Do we have different kinds of mental, emotional, and functional muscles to be able to actually play on different surfaces, to be able to run on different paths, maybe to walk on a hard surface, to run on sand, and to walk possibly on grass, and the performance on each of them being more or less similar. Are we capable of doing that or not? I think that's the question to ask ourselves, but also to ask, our people and leaders and managers and so on and so forth. Okay, Jyoti, we can go ahead. Okay. So, you can read most of the stuff, but maybe I should mention a couple. So there was a question in the initial set of questions I got around the VUCA world. Okay, and I think the concept of learning by itself, and I've still not got to nudge, learning itself is becoming so critical to survive in the VUCA world purely because things are changing every single day. Okay, and while you may have already been hearing around things like how people are getting laid off, role redundancy, the fact that companies are paying, for example, digital managers or digital freshers even significantly more salaries than others. I think some of these are realities which are starting to hit us. And if we don't acknowledge this whole concept of the fact that things are changing very very quickly, and we talk about this every day, so I don't want to go into too many examples and repetitions on this particular topic and slide, because all of our are aware. But the point is that, are we also doing it for ourselves, which is that, are we changing our skills, relooking at our reskilling ourselves and so on, in a very structured formal sort of way, and actually tracking that how are we growing as far as different muscles, if you want to call it that, are getting developed in our sort of professional portfolio, if you will. Okay. The other point I just want to maybe mention on this is that, as we go into a high change world and a VUCA world and whatever yes you want to call it, uh, I think the challenges also remain that it is not only about learning, but it is also about learning how to learn. Because the way we would have learned, for example, to run a PMS, or the way we would have let's say, learned to do PF, or we would have learned to do, anything else in HR, let's say 20 years back. Today, that concept has changed so much that I need to not only learn, but I need to build one more loop around saying, how am I learning? So, learning to learn actually by itself becomes quite a challenge. And, unless we change our ways of learning, it is going to be difficult to learn by itself. Okay. Okay, Jyoti, let's move on. Okay. So, before I go into the concept of nudge and how it sort of applies to learning, I think these are some, typical roadblocks which we face when people are learning, all of us individually, but also this is what we hear from our employees and managers and, all of that stuff. I think the bottom one, which is I am comfortable where I am. Why do I need to learn new skills? My sense is that people are, slowly getting out of that mindset. A lot of people now are actually looking at learning new things and so on and so forth. Whether they are actually behaviorally, so they are saying the right things, they're also possibly making some attempts. Whether they are behaviorally actually going out and doing it is a very, let's put it this way, that debatable issue from organization to organization for a variety of reasons. Not just the individual, but the organization environment, what kind of opportunities are there, and so on and so forth. We did at Think Talent, we did a short study about a year and a half back about managers learning to deal with millennial employees. I think about a year and a half back, And what we realize is that most managers still have, while they understand the concept that dealing or managing, dealing with or managing millennials will be very different than managing, the previous generation. But many of them have not really made an effort to go back to a classroom, or to go and do a e-learning, or to go do any kind of learning about actually saying, okay, so what do I need to do differently to be able to manage millennials? And the percentage of people who had actually gone in and learned was actually less than 30%. So close to 70-75% people had not got into formal learning of any kind, even though the issue was really known. It's not that, so this millennial thing and generation XYZ has been talked about now for quite some time, but people are still a little bit wary of you know going and putting their time on it. Maybe they think that I already know it, and so on and so forth. And we'll come back to that in a minute. So okay, so Jyoti, let me just stop for a minute and see if there are any quick questions on this. This is just the background, so I'm just aware, but I just don't want to go on and on if something doesn't make sense. So let's do a quick check, to see whether if there are any questions or comments on this till this space.
Bimal, we do not have any questions so far, so we can go ahead with the
Okay.
presentation.
Okay. So let's move to the next slide. Okay. So, most of you would have heard of this story about where a very learned person, an educator, actually went to a Zen master. And when he went to the Zen master, the Zen master obviously offered him tea, because this particular gentleman said, how can I become a Zen master? So you are a Zen master. Teach me how to become a Zen master. And as they were having tea, when the tea came in and the Zen master was pouring the tea, even when the cup was full, he kept pouring on and on and on and on. And obviously the tea started spilling out of the cup and falling into the tray or into the plate or whatever was there. And then suddenly this learned person said, "Sir, stop! Why are you doing this? Tea is spilling out of this cup." And the Zen master said, before you ask this question as to what do I need to learn to become a Zen master, the first question you need to ask is about emptying the cup, because if the cup is not empty, then tea cannot go in. And therefore, the question you need to ask is not so much about learning, but actually about unlearning a lot of stuff, which is emptying the cup. While this is a very famous story, and I'm sure many of you would have heard it earlier, I think the message I want to leave with you is that the concept of nudge applies as much to learning as to unlearning. Okay, and we'll see some examples as we go along. And I think it's very important to sort of uh, also use some of these concepts to help yourself and your teams and other people actually unlearn rather than just learn, so to say. Okay, yeah, Jyoti, let's move on.
Sure. All right. Just be
Let's move
before we move on to the next slide.
on.
In the previous slide, you had specifically spoke about the roadblocks. If you
Correct.
could share some examples or more insights on them, that's one of the
Sure.
questions that has come up from Prabodh Surya.
Sure. So let me give you, maybe two or three practical examples of what actually happens in organizations. Okay. So let's say that HR or the training department has designed a great program, and they're very excited about running it and so on and so forth. But you'll find at 9 o'clock on the morning of the program getting started. So all communication has been sent out, but at 9 o'clock the HR person is actually chasing everybody, saying, why are you not here in the classroom? We're starting at 9. Our internal or external or whatever faculty is there is standing here trying to get the, and you'll typically find people coming in late. There's a little bit of I would say almost an element of marginal disinterest, or more importantly, that they have given priority to something else as against given priority to this particular learning. Now, if you ask them that as to why were they late, or why did they not come on time or whatever, people would have many excuses. Okay, that my boss asked me to do this. I had something else to catch up on. I had a very urgent meeting. And while I am giving the example of a morning start, the same thing happens at tea time and lunch time and other things. And very often people will come up and say, can I take a break for 1 hour because I have something else to do? Now, the issue is not whether that reason being given is factually correct or not. That's not really the relevant issue. I think the relevant issue is that are people really prioritizing learning? Okay, I'm giving you one. The second is that in many cases, while you know individuals may want to learn, but the organization has not given them enough time or space to sort of learn. So one of the big roadblocks is that the managers of the individuals will nominate them because there's pressure from the top or pressure from HR. But when it comes to actually releasing the person and saying that okay, this person should now go on whatever Tuesday and Wednesday to attend this 2-day program, or even to do a short assignment somewhere, you will typically find managers not particularly, let's say, supportive. Okay. Let me also give an example from a non-classroom kind of a environment, right? We often get, when we run programs very often, it's quite fun actually, because you almost have a list of excuses which will come in when you start doing an online program or we do a lot of virtual learning work with large companies. So we have like training 1,000 people, 2,000 people, 5,000 people across companies. Sometimes with small companies like 100, 200. But we know that as we launch the program, because there's a mobile app and you can, you get updates on that and so on and so forth, you'll typically find somebody saying, mobile app is not working, I can't download it. I will, and the reality is that what he or she doesn't realize is that technology allows you to track everything. So we know that this person hasn't even gone and tried, but is making an excuse of saying the mobile is not working, or my laptop is not configured, or this or that, or so multiple reasons even on the technology side. Now, one is to be empathetic to such individuals and say that yeah, they have a genuine problem sometimes, and the reality is that there are sometimes genuine problems. But in many of these cases, it is actually just a roadblock in the mind of the individual, where either the person is uncomfortable, the person doesn't want to put in the time, doesn't want to. So there are, I'm just giving you some examples of roadblocks and somebody asked, but I'm sure all of you have a lot of experience of, many other roadblocks as far as training is concerned. Everything from budgets to time to, cost to that, my scooter broke down today. I have a puja at home on Monday, all kinds of things. Okay. So I'm sure there is a whole list. And, I am personally very amused whenever we launch a large program with companies that I know that, virtual program I'm talking about, we know exactly what the excuses which will come in the first week, pretty much. Okay. Okay, I don't know, Jyoti, whether that answers the question, but I'm sure we can move on and we can come back if required.
Sure, it definitely does give an insight on what roadblocks really are. And I'm sure in the coming slides, we would also get to know how to deal with such roadblocks.
Okay. So, this is a very old, familiar model. I'm sure, many of you would have sort of seen this. But I thought it is important, both from the VUCA point of view as well as the context of nudge point of view to, mention this and bring this into this particular session. Uh, we move from the top left to down to the bottom, and then to the right to the bottom right, and then up into the uh, top right. Okay, so we move from unconscious incompetence to conscious incompetence to conscious competence to unconscious competence. Interestingly, you will see, because this is a very old slide, you will see that there is no arrow between unconscious competence and unconscious incompetence. So there is no arrow between the right top and the left top, and there is almost an assumption that once you've built unconscious competence, you are all okay to do the job and whatever role you're performing. And I would like to sort of, in a way, if you go to the modern version of this, you will realize that there is a continuous loop, because roles are changing so quickly, the world is changing so quickly, even the context of what you are operating in and where you're operating is changing so quickly, that as you become competent in one particular skill or in one particular area, that area itself has changed. For example, let me give you a couple of examples. Okay. So if you look at retail, and I'm giving non-HR examples just to illustrate the point. So if you, for example, look at marketing manager's job. Okay, a traditional marketing manager, for example, and many people still do that job, would be, let's say, an expert in buying space on newspapers, hoarding, sponsorship, all that kind of stuff. Okay, that would be one of the major sort of expertise of a marketing or advertising manager, so to say, and dealing with agencies and so on and so forth. Okay. Now, if you look at the current marketing manager's job description, you will suddenly find that maybe there is a 20-25% still there of that kind, but 75% has become around social media, around digital, around what needs to be done to reach out to a younger audience. You know, the customer preferences are changing. Instead of in 2 years, when people used to be tied to a brand, now they're changing every second day. So customer understanding, understanding of non-retail environments or retail environments virtually rather than physically, and so on and so forth. Now, also, by itself, these are changing very quickly. So even if you get used to one social media platform, for example, you suddenly find that that itself has changed. The marketing manager has to continuously sort of, in a way, evolve their skills and evolve their. So being competent in one area by itself will not guarantee any success. And therefore, this becomes actually a full loop. So which basically means that you are unconscious and incompetent. You become conscious and competent, which basically means now that I don't have this skill. Then you become consciously competent, where you say, okay, I need to practice this skill. So you're very, very conscious about practicing the skill. Like a new driver, for example, where you are continuously holding the steering very tightly, and you're looking down at your clutch and so on and so forth. And at some stage, you become very good at driving. So you go up into the unconscious competence thing. And as you become good at driving and you're an outstanding driver, suddenly, there is a change, and they say, okay, now you will not be able to drive vehicles which have, let's say, a petrol or a diesel, and they're all going to be automatic, self-driven vehicles. And then all your skills are going to be completely differently defined. Okay. For example, if you have self-parking vehicles in the future, or you have vehicles which are actually controlled by robots and so on and so forth, and actually you just need to sit next to the robot, the way you will drive is actually going to be completely different, and therefore again you are back to unconscious incompetence, till you hit very quickly the conscious incompetence. This thing. The reason I bring this up is very simple, that it is absolutely critical that we realize that the nudge is a relevant concept, so that I keep moving through this circle all the time, which basically means I am learning all the time. Okay. Okay, let's move on, Jyoti. Yeah. So just to go to nudge, and many of you may have read it or seen it and so on and so forth. But a nudge is obviously a behavioral nudge to make sure that it moves, the behavior expected moves in a particular direction, and it is considered positive reinforcement. I think where the conceptual bit, I think, is important to explain, is one, that it still leaves the choice with the individual. So even after the nudging, the individual could still choose not to do things. Okay, whatever you are nudging them towards. Number one. Number two, uh, it's very important to understand that a nudging is not the same as setting a rule or a compliance or an enforcement or a top-down approach and so on and so forth. Okay. So, before I move on, let me give you a very quick example of nudge. Okay. Maybe a couple of examples from the airline industry. Okay. So, many of you obviously fly quite regularly, or maybe most of you. When Vistara came in, till Vistara actually came in, Vistara Airlines in India came in, uh, when a flight was announced, you would have seen that there's a huge amount of chaos. Everybody's trying to get in, into the flight, so through the door and the security gate and so on and so forth. And there's a bit of a chaos and so on and so forth. Okay. What did Vistara do? So what Vistara did is they created 3 or 4 separate lanes and started putting boards. Okay. Just saying this is row number, whatever, 31 to 29, sorry, 31 to 21, 21 to 14, or 20 to 14, and so on and so forth. And you slowly see that now the amount of boarding time, which, for example, Vistara takes, is significantly lower, because people automatically, not that everybody follows that still, there are still people who don't necessarily follow, but you will slowly see that a lot of people are starting to follow that. Of course, given that it is India, and in some places I have seen now that Vistara still makes announcements, okay, but it has improved productivity and efficiency by close to 50% in terms of the time taken to board a aircraft, and without any chaos. You will also notice that many other airlines are now starting to follow this. So some have moved to a zone concept, some are doing row numbers and so on and so forth. But clearly there is a very, very big impact behaviorally on the flyers as far as what Vistara has sort of in a way brought in. Okay. Let me give you another example. And this is an interesting example because there's a lot of, in the green energy area, there's a lot of work which gets done in this area. Okay. So, one of the big issues with hygiene in bathrooms was around that when people go into bathrooms, particularly a lot of people at least, let's put it this way, while coming out they don't wash their hands, and which was a big hygienic issue. So if you look at the design of the older toilets, they were done in a particular way. And about 15 years back, I think one of these companies, JLL or somebody, I don't know who actually, brought in this whole concept of the layout of the bathroom has to be different. So while the person is coming out of the toilet or the urinal, actually the way the basins are laid out, and the the dryer and the tissue paper box is laid out, is actually very different than the older toilets. Okay, not all toilets still follow this, but you will increasingly see, particularly in the green buildings, that by placing the basins and the toilet paper and the dryer in a particular way, the cleaning of hands has actually gone up significantly. Okay, because that's the hygienic issue which the green buildings were trying to sort of solve. Apart from, of course, it is also linked to water usage and you know not using more tissues and so on and so forth. And I think they're still struggling with some of those issues. But clearly, in terms of hygiene, you will see that it has fundamentally changed behaviors very differently. Okay, we can come back to more examples if people need that, but in the interest of time, let me first move on, and then we can come back to more questions. So Jyoti, I'm still very clear, right? Or are there questions coming in and we need to address them now?
You're absolutely clear, and we'll keep taking up questions. There's one question that I wanted to ask, since we are
Yeah.
currently referring to nudge. Is nudge only a learning related concept, or can it be used in other parts of HR and in other areas of development like OD, employee development, etc.?
So good question, Jyoti. So I think I mentioned it briefly, but maybe I was not clear enough earlier. So the concept of nudge actually can be applied to a wide variety of things in HR as well as outside HR, and specifically in areas of OD and broader areas like PMS and so on and so forth, where employees and managers are supposed to take action of some kind. Actually, nudge can be a very, very useful concept. So Jyoti, in short, yes, the concept can be applied to practically all areas of HR.
Okay, sure.
Okay, let's move on to the next slide. Yeah. Okay. So, in the context of learning, many of you would have seen this graph, and for those of you who are familiar with the Kirkpatrick's four-stage model, uh, you realize that actually, people forget things very quickly. Okay, so they go out of a course of any kind, whether it is virtual or classroom or a mobile learning app through an app or whatever it is. But the reality is that a lot of it gets lost very, very quickly. Okay, and this is where nudge can actually play a very, very significant sort of a role. Okay, let me give you a couple of very small examples on this slide, and then we'll go to a more deeper example in a while. Okay, so one of the things, for example, one of the companies we do some consulting work with them. I will not name the company. One of the things they do is that they actually, after, let's say, they've done a 1 day workshop on something, they will run a quiz contest on the third day, on the fifth day, on the seventh day, on the ninth day, for a period of 60 days. Okay, and it will be a very small thing, so a person can actually, so the question will come on the mail saying, you learned, let's say, about consumer behaviors of young adults. Where do you think you will be able to apply this in your workspace? Okay, similarly, there may be a second question which will say, you've already answered 3 out of the 5 questions correctly. Now you'll see that the tonality of this is a very positive orientation. It is not saying that you have not done you completed your whatever. So fourth and fifth question, it will say something like you've already done 60% of your work. Here are the two more things for you to get to 100%. Okay. Or it will give you a leaderboard saying, you are among the top 50 percentile of people in this course, and here's your opportunity to improve that 50% to moving to a 75th percentile score. Okay. Obviously technology makes this very, very easy. One of the examples you would often see that when you're trying to fill up a long form for something, okay, on the computer for whatever, it could be an insurance form, a medical form, trying to buy something, and let's say that you get irritated and you get a little fed up of the length of the form and you leave it. There'll be a gentle nudge which will come in maybe a day later or an SMS saying, you were trying to, let's say, the recent one I had was I was trying to book some tickets to London, and I left it in between because the net was very slow where I was. And then I get a call from ClearTrip saying, yeah, we know that you're an old customer, and you were trying to book something and looks like you lost the net connection. Is there any way we can help you? And when you do, and here was the nudge piece. So one is the help piece. The other nudge piece was saying that you don't have to go back to the internet and do this whole thing again. We'll put a credit in your account, and we'll debit the money out of your account, and so on and so forth. And the fact that I will do the ticketing for you rather than you going and doing it again. Okay. Now it was a very gentle nudge, and then of course I went and booked the ticket, on the call itself. But you will see that technology and stuff really helps this, and you know you will see this in every single sphere beyond just learning. Okay. Okay, let's move on, Jyoti, unless there's a question.
Yeah, you're with the next slide.
Okay, so what I'd like is that I have some questions from the from some people had already sent in questions, and I have those. But I think the question, and I don't think in this forum we can really do a discussion, but certainly like some ideas to look at. What is a good way to relook at all of your learning processes so that you are actually nudging learners? Okay. And I'll give you one example of a large company we work with in a little while. But I'd like you to make some notes, and maybe after I give you the example, it'll be good if some of you can share, or maybe ask questions, others in the group, or I can share, whether that is. But I think the trick to nudging is actually to redesign your processes. So, for example, let me give you two very specific examples which some of the companies do. Okay. So in most learning programs or in most learning interventions, you will find that attendance is taken. Okay, many companies take attendance saying, okay, you put in your employee ID and your name and sign the sheet, or do it online or whatever it is, right? Now, what this particular company has done, one of our clients, and now I think many companies are starting to do that. So there's an interesting, app feature which is there on their this thing. So what you do actually is that as you come into the classroom, instead of just saying that you have attended, on the screen actually there is a this thing which comes up, who has come in at what time. Okay, so it just shows on the screen, let's say the program starting at 9, somebody walks in at 8:55 or 8:54 or whatever it is. There's an app sensor, and the coordinator just puts in there, so the camera faces the individual. They take a photograph, and then you'll see the person's name flashing on the screen saying, Suman Desai entered the room at 8:55. And now the interesting bit is that this is shared till the last person sort of comes in. And what they've realized over time is that the behavior of individuals, because they see it on the screen in a public forum, so they don't do anything. They don't follow up with people. They don't tell people to come on time. There is just an invitation, single mail. They don't do multiple mails and so on and so forth. But in the classroom, they sort of showcase this, and they've changed their whole process of following up and chasing people and so on and so forth. But they've introduced this in the process of attendance, so to say. Okay. Now you can look at it as a gentle process of showing people their place, so to say, in that hierarchy of time. But also what happens is that, let's say if it's a 3-day program, you get scored at the end of the program saying, who came in at what time, how early did you come in. And actually the top 2 or 3 people get, some kind of a special recognition. So they could get an extra, a psychometric test to sort of complete, for example, and a report, or they could get a free coaching session, or they could just get a small chocolate or whatever it is, depending on the program. But they are all positive reinforcements. So the change to process also goes with the positive reinforcement, which then helps the learner to sort of change their behavior over a period of time. Particularly the younger learners, if I may say so. I don't know the average age in this group, so maybe I'm being a little cussed, let's put it this way. But clearly the younger learners pick this up much quicker. They know that there is a recognition and a reward, something at the end of it, and there's a little bit of a competitive spirit which also gets sort of set up, so to say. Okay. So similarly, you may have, I'm sure you will have examples of different kinds around how to sort of engage learners and so on and so forth. When I come to the next slide, I will give you some more examples. So Jyoti, if we can move. Okay. So this is a fairly busy slide. Okay. Uh, so this particular program is an intervention which you will see, as you will notice, it's a 3-month intervention. Okay, so it's a 12-month kind of an intervention, but you will see that at the bottom there is a sort of a blue marked thing which we have called nudges. Okay, now while there is 3 elements to the whole intervention. So you have self-study modules, you have facilitated sessions, and you have participant activities and assessment. But like all good learning interventions, many times these are not you know done on time or done properly, and so on and so forth. Now, if you will see on the nudges thing, you will see I'm going to take 2 or 3 of these. I'm not going to cover all of them. But for example, one of the nudge is about, you will see that message board. Okay, so it's like a leaderboard. Okay, so it gives you a sense of saying, where do you stand vis-a-vis other people? So have you completed your first 2 self-learning modules, and have you completed your virtual learning? So you can almost see green, yellow, blue, red kind of a thing, and that nudges people into saying, oh, I'm falling behind, or I need to do this quickly, or whatever it is. Okay, but the idea is that you have a virtual leaderboard, and in some cases this is published even to the managers of, in this particular program, it is only for the employees, or in this case, these are sort of mid-level employees, so about 15, 16 years experience. But sometimes it is even published in some companies. The leaderboard is also published to their managers. Okay. And the manager then gets a score saying, if I have nominated 5 employees, then, if they're not doing something, then, it shows up. But I think the important part of this is to understand that there is a reward linked to the better people. So the people who don't do it or don't complete on time or whatever it is, there is no negative implication. Okay, so it is not a punishment or anything. And I think that's where the concept of nudge is built more towards positive reinforcement. Okay. Let me take one more of this. Okay. So you will see in week 9, 10, there is a chat with the coach. Okay. Now, coaching is seen as a very, very fairly, privileged thing in our learning journeys, so to say. Okay, and most companies, people still feel that having a coach is a great thing. Okay, and which it is, by the way. Okay, so when you have to have a formal chat with the coach, you are more positively inclined to be better prepared, let's put it this way. Okay, and what happens before the coaching session is that you get a checklist where you are supposed to tick off, okay, all of this I have completed or not. And for each of the self-study modules or for the virtual sessions, you are supposed to list down a set of questions. Okay. So if you have not gone through your self-study modules, or you have not gone through your facilitated sessions, chances are that your conversation with the coach is not going to be of a very high quality. Okay, number one, so you don't benefit. And I am yet to see too many individuals, at least, who don't want to do well for themselves. Okay, so when they get a message saying you're going to get a senior coach for yourself, but please make sure that you complete all of this, and it's not directly told to them, so there's no follow-up. It is just that they get a checklist saying, please complete this checklist before you talk to the coach, and then you will see that all of it. And the best ones, where the coach then assesses saying, these people had the best questions, or these people did it on time and all that, they actually get additional coaching sessions sometimes, not in this particular program, but in some of the other interventions we do, which is something we found people really value. Because, in our culture, people like one-on-one conversations. They like to have private development conversations, and this saying that you'll get 2 additional coaching sessions with a senior coach really sort of helps people to do some of the other stuff as a nudge. Okay, and there are some other examples given there. Okay, so this is one example, as I said, and I've given some other examples from different places and different sort of functions as well. So Jyoti, let me stop here and let's take a few questions if we can.
Sure. In fact, in one of the previous slides, you was talking about the younger crowd. So there's one of the questions which has come from Paras who wants to know how to nurture talent amongst millennials on board and ensure higher retentions.
Okay, could you repeat that question?
Sure. Um, this is specifically about the millennials and how to ensure that the millennials have a longer tenure in the organization. How to
Right,
nurture talent amongst the millennials.
right. So it's a broad question, Paras, but let me try and answer this in the context of nudge. Okay. So from this construct and from a learning construct and from a retention context, as you say, I think there are three things which we have found, millennials are very driven with. Okay, from a learning point of view, I'm saying. One, they don't like too much of classroom and long sessions. Okay, so the more micro learning you can go to, the better off you are. They also like to learn at their own speed, at their own time. In fact, in this particular program, which where you see the slide today, we have found that 70% of the people actually complete their self studies between 11 and 1 in the night. Okay, because that's now become the lifestyle, right? So if you force them to do it at other times, or you force them to have modules which are, let's say, longer than 45 minutes or 1 hour, chances are that the traction will be very low. That is one. Okay. The second is, and this is our learning from the last many years now, having done this for a few clients. uh, See, the younger generation is very mobile savvy, if I may. Okay, so if you have a learning program which is disconnected with their mobile phone, okay, in the sense that you don't have an app, you don't have a messaging coming through the mobile phone, they have to go to another device, or they get physical messages or mail and so on and so forth, the traction is significantly lower. Okay, so in this particular program which I'm showing you, and all of our programs, we actually use an app. Okay, and we are finding that the traction of pushing content through app, pushing reminders through the app, pushing tests and assessments through the app, and making sure that they are able to do it at their own time in their own way, actually has huge traction with the younger generation. Okay, some of the people who are in the older generation are also the other way around, they don't like doing it. Okay, but for the millennials, I think if they see that the company is tech savvy, digital savvy, allowing me to learn at my own pace, clearly, and I get the recognition when I learn something, I think clearly that could help in retention. Of course, I am not going into the areas of their job design and responsibilities and performance appraisal and quality of manager and so on and so forth, which are also some of the other factors which play a very critical role. But from a learning point of view, I think some of these could help.
Thanks, Vimal. There's one more question from Shashidhar Bhatt who wants to know about autonomous learning.
Hmm?
Autonomous
So
learning.
yeah, I got the question. Yeah, autonomous learning. Yeah, I got it. So autonomous learning is sort of in a way a subset of self-learning. Okay, and what it does is that it does not define uh, a curriculum, if you will. Okay, so it allows you actually a lot of choice as to what do you want to really read. Okay, so in some of our programs, one of the programs we run for a large, well, let's call it a technology company. Okay, and this is for first line managers. Okay, so there are about, let's say, 25 modules. This is an old program, we finished this about a year and a half back. There are about 25 modules, but the individual gets to learn, as I said earlier, the two concepts of as and when they want, at their time they want. But the interesting bit also is that there are only 3 or 4 core modules. All the other modules the person can choose to do. So let's say that I do module 1 to 5 are core curriculum. I want to do 7, 8, 25, and 31, for example. I do those. I will get benefits of a particular kind. Okay, somebody else may say I want to do all the 35. Somebody else may say, I will do 16, 15, and whatever it is. And the way it is built is very closely hooked to the person's interest. Okay. It allows the person, and what we have found in this is that when people are allowed to learn things they like to learn, they will also do a few things which they don't necessarily like to learn. Okay, because they will then see the utility of the whole thing. So the concept of autonomous learning in this context, as it is applied, is about allowing the person the choices of both learning. When do I want to learn? How do I want to learn? What do I want to learn? Obviously, within a particular context and with some boundaries. Yeah, I don't know whether that answers your question, but hopefully it does.
It does. It definitely does. In fact, there's a similar question which has also come from Priyanka Praveen Jain, who
Mhm.
wants to know how is it that we can motivate employees to go for self-learning rather than going for a learning which is driven through the management.
Right, right. So, see, most of the nudge is actually still leaving the choice with the individual. Okay, in the sense that while you are nudging, but the person could still say, I don't want to be in the top 50 out of the 100. I'm okay if I'm at 30. It really doesn't make a difference to me, kind of thing. But having said that, I think in terms of a motivation, I think there are three things which we have found useful in many of our interventions. One is that I think the communication before any kind of a learning intervention, saying that how is this going to benefit the individual? Okay. Not necessarily that the individual will get to do the job better. See, these are two different things. Okay. So most people, I think, take the message that the company is giving me this training or giving me this, sort of input because it will help me do my job better. Which is obviously true in some ways. But if in the initial communication and continuous communication, you can actually allow the person a little bit of leeway in terms of communicating to them that this is not about the company or the immediate job you're doing, but this is about employability. This is about your future, your career, and so on and so forth. So in many of the companies now we work with, we actually in the initial and in the intermediate communication, we start with the concept of why is learning important, what is the VUCA world, and what will keep their careers sort of going. So we talk about that. The other thing maybe Priyanka may be useful to do is to maybe educate people almost around the fact that earlier careers were one longitudinal line, and now it is actually a series of maybe every 4 or 5 years you have to almost change yourself or reinvent yourself to be relevant and build a career. And we can see this all along anyway already coming in. So if you can, two things, therefore I'm saying this to summarize. One is a very strong and continuous communication around relevance to the individual as against relevant to the job and the company. And two, a link to their career, that what can this do for them, and why a linear career is not a relevant career for the future. I think those two messages, I have found that people are very smart. They pick it up very quickly, and then they apply themselves, pretty well actually. Uh, in fact, the interesting bit, if I may add, is that you will find with younger learners, they will actually go out and do additional learning because now there are a lot of MOOC courses available, freeware available, and so they will attend the company one, but they will also go out and do other courses which the company will not even be aware of because they want to deepen their skill and they have caught on to this concept that I need to learn myself, kind of thing. Yeah. So I think those are a couple of things you could do.
Great. Thanks, Bimal. This is also another interesting question which has come from Shailendra Singh. So, specifically in his company, they had recently rolled out the new vision, mission, and values of the organization. And there's been a lot of training sessions around the same. However, in order to ensure that there is a deeper penetration, what would be the right nudge? Because they've tried, going back and asking the employees, however, they are unable to recall. So there's certainly a
Mhm.
deeper penetration required for that. So if you could please let us know if there's, how to have the employees retain the learning for
Mhm.
something which is rolled out company wide across different locations.
Sure. So I would say there are three things, Shalin, you may want to explore. Okay. So one is that is there a possibility of using technology in any way, whether it is through an app or whether it is online through a web portal or whatever it is, and link that usage of anything you set up. It could be a quiz, it could be, so not pushing more content, okay, but allowing people to, for example, so you could have locational contests, for example, online or offline, where there is a reward or a this thing. Online would be better because you'll then be able to track company wide data and actually show everybody that, okay, location X is leading location Z, and you'll suddenly see that there's a spurt because people in our cultures are a little bit competitive in that sense, right? So contests and recognitions preferably linked to technology is one way of doing it, okay. If you have a lot of blue collar workers, and I don't know whether you have, but if you have, I think they like to participate a lot in projects which is outside their routine work, okay. So if you could build project opportunities or cross functional teams and so on and so forth, and link it to the vision, saying that because we have this vision and mission, and therefore here are the three critical projects, and we want, let's say, volunteers to come into this project and work on this, and then showcase at the end of, let's say, 1 month or 3 months, that these teams, these are the people who worked in these teams. It is linked to our vision of, let's say, producing XYZ, and this is the result of a contest, and sorry, of this cross functional team, and this project team has done this. And maybe link it to communication at a wider, on a wider basis, if you have a internal portal or a magazine or whatever it is. But I think the point I'm making is that the nudge has to be uh, a positive influence where people's uh, inside out kind of motivation gets generated because they see something at the end of it, whether it is respect, whether it is recognition, whether it is a pat on the back from a senior management, and so on and so forth. So some of those could possibly help. Of course, there are other nudge things which people do, for example, physical things like cups and danglers, and every day on your screen you will have other stuff, but that is, I think, less effective in my view. People just get used to it.
Right. So, Challenge, of course, Vimal, very nice inputs, and there are multiple series of efforts that have to be driven simultaneously to ensure that there's a deeper penetration. So, Shalendra, please feel free to write in the chat window in case there are any further queries on this. Um, would you like us to move on to the next window, to the
uh,
next slide?
yeah, there is, yeah, I don't think that, yeah, there is a slide, but I don't think it has anything significant. So if the other questions, we can take those, or the previous questions which came in, we can cover off some of those.
Sure.
We're
Yes, we do
just
have
over
more.
time, so you can see if you have more questions, we should cover that off.
Yes, we do have questions, and I would request the audience to please share any further questions and queries that they would like us to take us during the session. There's one of the questions that had come from Vinisha Call, who
Mhm.
specifically wants to know that there are HR efforts are mostly focused around the learning and growth of the employees. What should HR do to self accelerate their own personal growth?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, and it's a question I've been hearing for many many years. Okay, so so I'm not sure how to answer it, but let me try and take a stab at it. Okay. Uh, I think we, while we are HR, we are also like any other employees in a way, right? So we are also human beings, and we have our own ups and downs. We get busy, we don't have time, we don't invest in ourselves enough, and so on and so forth. So I have found that there are three or four things which really work in this. Okay, so firstly, I think calendarize your learning. Okay, in the sense that if you really want to grow, you have to make time for it. I think we don't make time for it. Our calendars get filled with everything but investing in ourselves. Okay, so for example, one of the things I used to do, I used to live in Singapore for a few years, and I was trying to learn Chinese. Unfortunately, I got transferred. But when I started to learn Chinese, one of the things somebody told me is that don't do it randomly. You have to make half an hour sort of every day. So what I used to do is that I used to go to the office half an hour earlier than my usual time. I'm early person, so I used to go half an hour, 45 minutes, and actually put my phone off, close my door, and make sure that I'm doing like half an hour of Chinese learning functional learning during that period. Literally take a copy and write, the symbols and pronounce them and speak to them, and then once a week stand in front of a mirror and talk about about whatever I've learned in terms of the language and so on and so forth. So making time is number one. Okay, if you don't make time, it will not get done. I can tell you that much. Okay, number one. Number two, what works is having a buddy. Okay, so if you have a buddy or a partner, and not necessarily one, but a group of 3 or 4 people, we have, of course, in this forum, we have a very large group which is enabling some learning. But if you have a if you have a small group of people and you make time again in that small group to come and share as to what have I learned in the last 1 month or in the last 2 weeks or whatever it is, and uh, in a way push each other and hold each other accountable, I have found that works pretty well if you are disciplined about it. Okay, and I think the third thing I would certainly encourage people to do is to not limit themselves to the HR functional learning. While that is important, but I think pick up an area where you are interested. For example, I'll give you a very live example. Okay, and this is one of my favorite examples actually, right? So I travel a lot. Okay, and different countries, different places. So I'd gone to Egypt a few years back, and so for those of you who know, ancient Egypt, there were these pharaohs some 3,000, 4,000 years back, and they have these hieroglyphics on the walls, which you can actually the experts sort of interpret them for you. Okay, and on one of the walls there was a very interesting writing by one of the kings, or written by somebody but given by the king, saying, if you have to select courtiers, what are the 10 things you should look at? Okay, and it had some interesting stuff like character, past performance, family, and so on and so forth. And it certainly clicked with me that we keep talking about selection and performance and this thing, but these people were doing it 4,000 years back. And then I caught hold of somebody there and said, can you give me more material on this particular thing? And some of the material they shared with me was outstanding, because it talks about much deeper things in selection, particularly leadership selection, than I had come across in many of my things. For example, it talks about the judgment of the individual, and it says that you should not ever put a person in a courtier's job if the quality of their judgment is bad. And then there are some bullets saying how will you check judgment and so on and so forth. So one of the things I would encourage all of you is that don't limit yourself to HR learning. Look at a broader thing, which whatever is your interest. In my case, it was travel and so on and so forth. You may have sports, you may have something else, but if you engage with that, I think your learning process will speeden up quite a bit actually.
Absolutely. So I think out of my experience also, what I feel, what you mentioned, calendarizing the learning activities and not letting the daily activities or any last minute issues take precedence over it is equally important. So, of course. We moving on to the next question. We have another question which has come up in the live chat. What reward mechanism should we reinforce for bringing the right intervention in talent management practice?
Mm, what reward mechanism we should reinforce for bringing the right intervention in the right talent management practice? Okay, so I think so I can share with you a couple of them which I have seen working. Okay, so one of them, one of the companies has a uh, has a process where they give you points. Okay, so they don't give you points for completion of a course, but they give you points. For example, if you take this is a technical company. Okay, this is a very large but a technical company, in the sense that a lot of their learning is around technical skills, so functional skills. And they talk about, if you implement a process, you have learned something, you implement a process or you make some improvement and you showcase that, you are actually able to get uh, some points for that, and they get added up on the year, and they actually finally go into your individual development plan and your performance appraisal at the end of the year. While it may not at this stage, I don't think it makes a significant difference to your performance, but the kind of courses you get assigned, you get sort of nominated to at the end of the year. Some people get nominated to very high quality technical courses globally and so on and so forth. And that is a huge reward for technical people, at least, because this is I can share with you, this is a chemical company. Okay, so they are allowed, for example, to go to a conference and present a paper. Okay, and these are like scientists, these are PhDs and double PhDs, and some of them are allowed, for example, to go and attend something in the US which is very topical to their industry and so on and so forth. That really, so it depends on how many points have added up through the year. That's one. I think the second is, which works in many companies, is that uh, if talented people are doing something from a process point of view which is, let's say, commendable. Typically what would happen is that they get, and this is, I can share with you, this is Shell. Okay, the oil company, they have a funding mechanism. Okay, so they have a scheme called intrapreneurship scheme, where if the person has done all that he or she is supposed to do, they actually get funding to run a project by themselves. Okay, and it's a small funding depending on the level and the location and so on and so forth. But clearly there is these kind of positive reinforcements which companies are trying, and it is sort of helping this thing. I think otherwise, individual talent, there are obviously the usual mechanisms of comp and ben and promotions and so on and so forth. But I think some of these other ones which are, how do you put it, which are uh, which are touching the person a little bit more inside them. They feel great because they get recognized, they get to present a paper, they are sent to the right places, they are called to, let's say, a CEO lunch and so on and so forth. I think those are equally and possibly in many cases much more effective. Yeah, I
Yeah.
don't know whether that answers all parts of your question, but certainly I think some of these are my experiences.
Thanks, Bimal. That definitely does. Another question is from RK, who wants to know what are the matrices that can be used to measure the impact of a specific nudge?
Yeah, yeah, that's a great question. Uh, I think you could do two or three things. Okay, and because we do it, so I'm sharing these tricks with you. One is that I don't know whether you're familiar with the A/B testing. Okay, so if you're familiar with A/B testing, what you do is you try two different kinds of nudges and see which is more effective. Okay, so you can read up. A/B testing is a specific thing which is used in many experimental things. So I don't want to go into the details of that. But A/B testing is one principle you could use, where you actually give two different nudges, let's say, to two different groups, and then you compare which is more effective. Okay, and which one works better for you. That's one. I think the second one is actually to, what we find is that at the end of, let's say, a particular module, or at the end of a particular intervention or whatever, we actually do a poll of what did people like. Okay, and it's a list of all the nudges, and you will find that, let's say, 70% people have said that I in one particular program I'm taking, which we run for somebody, where they said that what we liked really is that if a assignment had to be completed on Monday, we got a gentle reminder actually 3 days before that. Okay, and when we completed the assignment, it actually said, great, you've completed the assignment on time, do you really require a reminder next time? That's what the question which came up on the app. And the person either said yes or no. Most of them still said yes, but if they said yes, they would still get another reminder for the next assignment 3 days prior. But the tonality of the message was that you are great and you don't really need a nudge kind of a thing the next time, and that made the person feel great. I think the third one I can tell you. So the poll you can do at the end of the thing, which I'm telling you, and I gave you one example of what people liked really, so we knew this was effective. I think the other one you could do is to check whether on the leaderboard what is moving. So if you track your data on the leaderboard in terms of when do people complete something, or when do people actually do an assignment or assessment or whatever, you will suddenly find that you are able to get a fairly good insight on what is working or what is not working. Okay, so those are some of the things, RK, which can be useful depending on the context.
Great. Thanks, Bimal. In fact, what are the principles of behavioral economics that are being used to nudge employees towards learning? Abhishek Nag wanted to know that.
So nudge itself is a behavioral, economics concept. Okay, that what it says is that there are lower level rewards and there are higher level rewards, and in every context, people will go in for particular kind of rewards if they see that as more valuable. Okay, so by using positive reinforcement as against negative reinforcement, and using nudges and linking it to in a way some of the deeper constructs of um, human desire, and the core of the human being, in terms of getting appreciated, getting more social, feeling privileged, and so on and so forth. I think if you can show value to people, that's where the whole connect is actually. And this particular uh, construct actually has come from a large part of it has come from behavioral economics. So what you're doing is you're showing value uh, through a positive reinforcement mechanism, and linking it to the person getting some return, not necessarily of a monetary or a concrete kind, but certainly which appeals to his or her higher sense.
Great. Thanks, Bimal. The next question is from Mayank Sehgal, who wanted to know, is bite-sized learning better than classroom training?
Hmm.
Also, in my experience, I've seen a lot of people are more interested in classroom learning rather than going through e-modules.
Yeah. So so Jyoti, I'll come to your comment a little bit later, but let me answer the first part. So I think, let me answer that from a different perspective. Okay, I think if you are looking at building knowledge and perspective, I think bite-sized learning and self-paced learning and so on and so forth, and e-learning and all that is fairly useful. Okay, and partly to Jyoti's point, I think some crowds are more comfortable with learning at their own pace, and the younger crowds, as I said earlier, like this. A lot of people still like to have leader led learning or facilitator led learning in the classroom, even for knowledge and perspective. Okay, having said that, if you are doing any kind of training or intervention which is specific to building skills, then a virtual construct may not always work. So a classroom setting or some kind of a job related setting may actually be far, or a coaching related setting or whatever, is far more useful. Building skills, particularly behavioral and leadership skills, in a non classroom setting, apart from of course a job setting, is not very useful. So I would say that look at your audience. If your audience is much more tuned to classroom learning, then design it that way, but maybe start coupling it with some virtual and digital bite-sized learning. But if you are doing skill building and not knowledge and this thing, then I would say that do a go through a more classroom thing. I think the other thing I must mention here is that if you are doing, for example, if you want to do deep functional learning, okay, somebody, you want to teach somebody, let's say for example, costing, okay, of, let's say, large engineering goods. Okay, so you have to do a large machine which is worth, let's say, 17 crores, and a ship you have to build, let's say for example, and you want people how to learn to build ships. That kind of deep learning engineering or process or something. While virtual learning can supplement it, I think what has been seen is that you need some degree of contact learning, fairly deep, to be able to help with that, and supplement that, as I said, with virtual learning. So that's what's been, I think, generally the trend which is being seen more and more.
Right. In fact, there are a lot of courses, even on AI and data modeling, which are coming through as virtual learning modules.
Correct,
So,
correct.
yeah.
Yeah, but those are also knowledge, and if I may say so, they are mostly knowledge and how do you put it? They're knowledge and perspective building, but you are not actually learning to design something. That you have to either do on your own, or then sit with a mentor or a coach or work with a team to actually get that done.
Right, absolutely right. There's one last question that I would like to take up, and this is from Vivek, who wanted to know, how do we ensure growth of employees who are nearing retirement?
Hmm. Yeah, I think there are two, three things, which, I used to run a program. I don't run it now, but I used to run a program a few years back for for very senior employees, around self management actually. Okay, and I was doing one part of it, and there were other people who used to do issues of financial management after retirement and so on and so forth. I think what the perspective I'd like to share to you, Vivek, for you, but also for others, is that I think people have to be made to realize that life doesn't end at retirement. Okay, and I know I'm giving you a very philosophical, conceptual answer, but from a growth perspective, I think you have to delink person's growth linked to company to person growing as an individual. Okay, I think people realize it sometimes by themselves, and they know that I have another 10, 15, 20 years to go, and I can uh, you know uh, do something beyond just post retirement. I can do other things, whether I teach or I become a consultant in my own space or whatever it is. But I think that realization that um, that I have another 15, 20 years to go is an important aspect. Now, in that program, one of the slides I used to show was around how people are living longer, and there is a need for financial stability, and the fact that people are remaining healthier longer and longer as with time. So people used to by the time there were 45, 50, people used to die, let's say a century back, or not even a century, actually 50, 60 years back. And now people live up to average age has gone up, and therefore you have to survive for that time, and you do. I think the other is that we used to do as part of that workshop what we used to call a purpose finding, which is that what are what's my core purpose, and what do I really want to do over the next 15, 20 years, which I may or may not have been able to do earlier. Okay, and I think that often connects with people actually quite nicely, and that then gives them the motivation to grow. But I think the definition of growth has to change from growing in a function or a team or within a company to personal growth. Okay, and I think that element of meeting your personal growth goals has to be sort of in a way brought in, and that's when people will try to reinvent themselves, and be motivated to learn something new.
Great. Thanks, Vimal. Thanks a lot with this. No, we don't have any further questions from our audience.
Yeah.
I would like to take this opportunity to thank you for all your time, specifically being with us today on your special day. A very
Mhm.
happy birthday to you from all our
Thank you.
side, all of
Thank you.
our side, and thanks for all your insights and knowledge that you've shared with us today. It has been a golden opportunity for us to learn. Uh,
Great. No,
so
thank you very much. I think this was I like doing this, and as long as people found it useful and can go back and use some of it, I think I would be very grateful. And again, thank you for spending your Saturday evening with me, as they say. Yeah. So yeah, all the best to all of you. Thank you very
thank
much.
you, Vimal, and a big thanks to all the audience who've joined us today. Please share your feedback for the session with us. And a big thanks to Veer Bhanu, Kirti, Kashish, and Anu, the entire core HRIR team, and many more behind the scene for their never ending support. Have a great weekend ahead. Thanks, Vimal, once again.
Thank you. Yeah. Bye bye, guys.